Today I'll be reading a research paper that I wrote in February 2014. It was published in 2015 in the Indiana University Southeast Undergraduate Research Journal, Volume 7. A political portrait of Jean Genet through his theater. Jean Genet lived from 1910 to 1986. He was born and died in Paris, France. Though he did travel, he was an international criminal. He stole cattle in southeastern Europe, smuggled narcotics in Iberia, was a pickpocket in Central Europe, joined and quickly deserted the Foreign Legion. All of these acts were only a piece of Genet. He was also a poet, playwright, as well as a novelist and essayist. In 1947, Genet received his 10th accusation of theft, and French law dictated that was to be his final accusation. Thus, imprisoned is where Genet began writing. Most, if not all, of his earlier works were written in jail cells because of his criminal habits. Genet started his first novel, Our Lady of the Flowers, during the 1940s in Fresnes prison. I said that right. I don't speak French. But he was not in prison long. Sartre, Mondor, we have Henry Mondor. Those are the only two I mentioned in the paper. But there was also Pablo Picasso and a lot of other more infamous people. Other intellectuals, mostly writers and artists that were very popular and influential, were able to persuade the president to pardon Genet. After all, in France, artists and writers were not simply seen as entertainers, but political actors who were sacred to society. He was raised in orphanages, reform schools, and jails, and he was a criminal until approximately 30 years of age. To begin to understand Genet's theater and politics, it is vital to know what was occurring during his lifetime. It is more relevant to consider the art and science scenes that reverberate through Genet's work than it is to know of any historically grand events that may attempt to auction off Genet as simply a product of his environment. Two figures that revolutionize mankind's understanding or perception of truth, knowledge, art, and reality are important to mention. Werner Heisenberg, who lived from 1901 to 1976, developed the uncertainty principle. Heisenberg measured the speed of subatomic particles, but while doing so, he noticed that the speed of the particles would change by the pure act of observation. He noted that the presence of an observer changed the event. What was being observed was manipulated and altered by sight. Because of this observation, he argued that humans cannot know nor be certain of the knowledge that they regard as fact. All the science once considered constant is only one small possibility of the endless perceptions. Ideas of truth, knowledge, and facts are partial and limited. For example, the truth of a urinal is that it is for urination. But Marcel Duchamp in 1917 took the urinal out of its mundane context and with no more than a tilt and a signature morphed it into an art form beyond its standard utilitarian purpose. It is art by its design, not by its function or relation to reality. A chair can be art by its design itself, not by its purpose or function in the limited context prescribed to it. Continuous questioning was happening in the world around Genet, and there he found his place within it. Duchamp and Heisenberg relate to the relevance of Genet's theater and politics because Genet's theater applies, like Heisenberg, that facts are limited. By observing his plays, people may assume that what is being first observed is the way that it is until they are betrayed and discover that their original observation was only true temporarily. Then the play takes a new direction or observation and then becomes an alternative truth. As Duchamp extended the definition of art to be more inclusive and involve everyday objects that would have been dismissed, Genet took everyday truths and lies and expanded them to include one another as the same thing. Genet's politics also combines opposites into being identical. Duchamp's objects were given a more spiritual role as art forms and not just objects to be used in crafting other objects. The tools of the craft themselves can be seen as objects of art, not just the objects that these tools may make into art. Genet took the tools of social life, such as lies and relationships, along with the tools of theater to create a new life that existed upon the stage, yet was not confined to it. His message escaped and can be adapted to political situations. Just as Duchamp took objects that would not normally be contextualized as art, Genet took situations and contextualized them toward a destination that would have been otherwise unforeseen. This intellectual society liberated Genet and allowed him to take part in it. Often he was complex, confusing, and contradictory, but he had his reasons for this. Genet showed truths through fiction by communicating something true, though it may have never happened. Genet exposed characters within characters, and all of the characters were Genet, their creator. Genet recognized duality and that with the task of being a creator, one also assumes the role of being a destroyer. Duality appears as a universal pattern exemplified in many forms. Perfumes contain a hint of stench. Venom that kills is the source of the medicine that cures. Not only is the nature of duality explained by oppositions such as negativity, positivity, love and hate, peace and war, but those oppositions are also complementary and supportive of one another in a gentle shuffle of push and pull. It is possible to understand things by comparison or contrast, but also through dissection and analysis. When one probes amply, one emerges out the other side, not from what one first observed, but its supposed opposite. A face? No. A mask? Yes. And another face wearing a mask. These characters are reflections. They are identical yet opposite, like looking into a mirror. It is the same but different. Genet did not attempt to deny his theater as false. He wanted credit for his creations. He was not a historian simply narrating facts, but an artist who pulverized facts until they bled their essence, then he made you drink it like bad-tasting medicine. Genet would betray his audience, but in such a way that made them feel as if it were a privilege or blessing to have been betrayed by him. During the first scene from his play, The Maids, it is not obvious that both actresses on stage are maids. Then suddenly they begin shouting about a woman who will be returning soon. Then the maid that has been pretending to be Madame, the woman returning soon, puts on her apron and begins performing chores. From this, the viewer gains a sense of betrayal. What one might have thought the play was, it was not. It was a play within a play. These characters are not just characters, but caricatures. Their behavior is erratic and their tones are overdramatic. They have sharp mood swings and are over the top. Some references they spoke of during the first scene are still spoken of during the following scene, thus not all of the first play within the play was false, even though the scene was not true. In the dialogue that follows, the audience discovers that the other maid played Madame yesterday, and the other maid that was Madame today critiques the other's portrayal of Madame. Thus, a type of self-critique and self-reflection is also in action, for both have been Madame. It is possible at this point that the second maid is an extension of the first maid, or the manifested imagination of the first maid. Henceforth anything is possible, for the audience has already been betrayed once already. There could have been many Madames. Perhaps as previous women the maids have served or have been. Each maid spoke of killing or arresting these Madames, perhaps as a symbol of killing off past versions of themselves, just as Genet has been shedding his own skin time and time again. He has been his own oppressor and servant. Hints of the characters within characters, or the characters are all the same person, are given symbolically throughout the play by the maids complaining about each other's fashion accessories and other items being mixed up into each other's space and fears that Madame will unriddle them. Like the argument of Epimenides, the argument, there's a footnote here. Epimenides says the Cretans are liars, but he is a Cretan, therefore he lies. Therefore Cretans are not liars, therefore he speaks the truth. Therefore Cretans are liars, therefore he lies, etc. This is the argument of Epimenides. It is the model of circular sophistry as bequeathed by the ancient skepticism. Truth leads to the lie and vice versa. Like the argument of Epimenides, Genet's method of lies exposing truths and truths exposing lies is also employed in his play The Blacks, a clown show. Relative to this play is a certain word that has crept into the vocabulary of the English language that demonstrates Genet's method. Certainly this word is known, so it dare not be written here. This word, like any racial slur, is a lie. When the word is directed at a recipient, it is reflected back upon the sender, which thereby causes the sender to become the recipient, who is no longer the sender of what he thinks of as true, and is no longer the sender of a lie, but is the recipient of a truth. Backlash. By dealing this word, one exposes more of their own character than what one is attempting to belittle in another. One shows their backwardness and ignorance and shows their self as a slimy, hateful bigot. When a white man launches this word, he intends to insult another, the black, but only insults his own humanity and humility. He wants to send a message to show his dominance and superiority, but the reflection shows his silly stubbornness. He may want blacks to submit to his biased opinion or prejudice, but the blacks do not fulfill his desired role of them to be recipients. Instead, the blacks are not duped by some silly grand dragon in a dress, but reflect back his message, thereby making the sender submit to his own destruction. Sender becomes recipient, and recipient becomes sender. The sender's lie, which he thinks is true, becomes the truth, but not for the recipient, but for the sender himself. To define politics in a way that relates to Genet's theater, it's possible to define politics as many things simultaneously, just as Genet's plays are many things all at once. Politics is an art of deception and illumination that simultaneously disguises and alludes to truths and lies. Politics is also a method of disguising lies as truths and truths as lies, with the intent of persuading enough people to believe a lie until it becomes true. If enough people believe a lie, in a way, it does become a truth. A more narrative definition of politics is an interdependent relationship between heroes and villains who can often not just depend upon each other to fulfill their roles, but become one another by confusing themselves with each other, or by clarifying themselves through each other, clarifying themselves and each other. As a consequence of that definition, politics must also be duality, but not one that is necessarily dueling, but instead is complementing and negotiating, like perfume and stench or medicine and poison that are often the same and are complementing and becoming one another. Political theater can operate in the same mode. Political theater tells a story that is true, yet it may have never occurred. Political theater blends and binds fiction with fact, just as politics stitches together logic and absurdness. Politics is the transient process of an ability to metamorph. If the politics of Jean Genet's theater were to be universally employed by every individual, there would be benefits as well as repercussions. The interdependence of Genet's characters and facts upon fiction can also be a symbiotic relationship that cultivates parasites and leeches, where thieves fare better through gaining possessions that victims have lost. The vicious cycle this creates can cause victims to turn to theft by referendum. They could become what they are against. This is but one consequence of Genet's politics, and perhaps is a perversion of his politics, though any rule may always have at least one exception or loophole. Overall, Genet's politics are beneficial because people who become what they are against can also gain greater understanding through an extreme sympathy or empathy, and eventually may even have compassion for their foes. Genet himself has spoken of politics in a similar manner when he said that politics must be a purge of anger and not a reconciliation of differences. These differences cannot be reconciled because they are figments created by man to distinguish himself as separate from something he is really a part of. Anger must be purged from politics because anger is a misleading emotion that is felt or caused by witnessing sights that one does not understand or agree with. If one cannot understand them or agree with them, then one is prone to fear them. The elaboration of Genet's words is not one that can be developed by simply interpreting Genet on the surface or accepting his words at face value. Genet was more complex and did not speak so obviously simple. Just as his plays provoke the audience to analyze, because often what appears to be happening in them is not actually occurring, Genet himself should be analyzed because of his deceitful, contradictory, and complex nature. Genet's methods which employ deceit are only his individual modes of operation. More important is not how Genet has done his theater and politics, but what Genet has done with them as a result or side effect of his tactics. Genet's deceit causes the audience to analyze and not take things for granted, but to ask questions and cause them to see themselves in one another, in that they are all Genet and thus are all the same. Differences are defined by insignificant details. This exposes a prominent problem with politics. Genet, as an outcast, showed that the problem with politics is that everyone wants to belong. Everybody wants to have something to stand for or have an ideology that represents them, and they may commit dangerous and extreme acts to defend their ideologies. Everyone wants to find a party accepting of them because parties all fit under the umbrella of politics and operating on the same issues. They're all essentially the same, which causes parties to present themselves as distinct and different from others and create a false sense of identity and separation. Similarities are denied because the ego wants to prevail as something separate and unique and has a hard time letting go and separating from the self. This sense of belonging can not only be created by what one endorses, but by what one opposes. Belonging can be felt by separation. A sense of belonging can be brought about by its opposite, denial. By denying others admittance to a party, an us versus them mentality is created. Hatred becomes an instrument of unity as more people rally over what they are against. However, situations, ideologies, and people can be so different to such an extreme that they become similar. They can be so far apart from one another that they are together, like those who try to distance themselves from others by traveling further and further. If they travel far enough from what they try to escape, they circle the globe and return to what they fled from. In such situations, rebellion becomes a form of conformity. The politics of Genet's theater is found within social constructs as well. In Carl Laveri's book, The Politics of John Genet's Theater, Spaces of Revolution, Genet is quoted as saying that each individual hides a secret wound that contains the root of his identity, and the other way for possible communication between the only way for possible communication between individuals consists in recognition of each other's solitude. Lavery interpreted this as Genet seeing that the wound as the catalyst for the politics of radical equality. That is another way to say that if we do not acknowledge others' loneliness, we cannot communicate. Solitude is not only a synonym of loneliness. One may choose to disregard others, thus choose solitude, and not necessarily feel lonesome over the effect of their choice. Their solitude in such a situation represents individuality instead of loneliness. Therefore, Genet was saying that a group must respect each other's individuality in order to communicate with them in the idealized manner without rejecting one another because of personal identity. Personal identity does not separate us, it simply lubricates the communication process. If all people were exactly the same, then there could be nothing that they could say to one another that they have not already said to themselves. Differences are needed to distinguish temporarily, but in the end these differences are not sustainable and dissolve into a solvent that all becomes a solution within. Genet's plays illustrate these points through subjects such as gender confusion and situational homosexuality, and the fact that his characters are one another and thus are variations of one individual as a whole that has been dissected and categorized only to come back together as one solid unit again, or that each person no longer appeared before me in his total, absolute, and magnificent individuality, but rather a fragmentary appearance of one sole being, as Genet said. The wound is the crisis that is needed to form a response and to form a sense of collectiveness and connectedness, for, if at no other time, humans are helpful toward one another in situations of crises. When there is no wound, there is no healing. Wounds, just as Genet's tactics of deceptions, can be painful, but what they cause in turn is rejuvenation. A wound can also expose guts and cords. They are essentially the same. From person to person, it is only our exterior shells that differ. These shells are external constructs to aid in making sense of our surroundings. They aid in clarifying and categorizing to make communication possible and define topics so to not confuse subjects. At the core, people are identical. Because of this, Genet's politics of deceit, which has negative connotations, is actually one of positivity and uses something bad to become something good. It does not only create positivity from negativity, but redefines negativity as something capable of greater feats than pure deceit. This deceit is used to reveal universal characteristics. Genet has manipulated evil into something else, not simply used it as a tool, but has seen the good within the evil. Genet's evil is not the common understanding of good versus evil, but a dance between the two in which evil is his code word for the outsider's morality. The same way that Genet's politics invites his audience to see themselves as one another and thus become more accepting of people that they would otherwise deem as enemies, His methods also employ the same type of twist in terms of looking within to see the outside, or instead of bringing the flower out of a branch, brings them back to it, glues them to the wood, as inseparable and not just an extension of other, but as a different form of the same thing. The flower, branch, and wood are all tree. In this sense, the source or cause of the flower is more than just its origin. It is itself, and it has transcended itself. After all, Genet's politics also is a transient process of an ability to metamorph. For Genet's politics to be universally employable, the change will have to come from culture first. Culture must be able to absorb Genet, and for this to be possible, the human psyche must first be able to comprehend Genet in his politics and theater before being able to advance from them. If he is simply seen as a confusing and contradictory and/or a deceitful liar and entertainer, then his inner workings cannot be extracted. It is not up to those who participate in the limited scope of politics, politicians that run governments, to make this shift, but it is up to the artists, whether they be writers, various visual artists, or directors, along with everyday citizens and admirers of the arts. The mass of people on the grounds must be the ones to build momentum. If this change is attempted to be employed from the top down, then many people below may not be prepared for it. It is difficult to accept anything when it is prescribed forcefully. This acceptance should be one of willingness and involve a conscious effort. When this is done the latter way, the experience may be more intimate, genuine, and sincere, and thus stand a greater chance of being perfected, as opposed to the former method in which it may be consumed out of the convenience of mass production. If this adoption of Genet's politics were to take place through grassroots movements, it would probably have his support, at least until it becomes exhausted and collapses under its own weight or becomes a novelty. Genet's politics must be applied with caution or even hesitation. Because he was not attempting to create a political philosophy, his system does contain errors and is not foolproof. Perhaps his politics instills too much faith in individuals to act responsibly. Genet did not differentiate facts from fiction, but there are universally accepted facts within the material world. At least there appears to be such facts, but perhaps these facts are only created or agreed upon by a shared illusion to facilitate the ease of making sense of what is claimed as reality. Again, Genet's politics are not for the faint of mind and require some form of self-control, thought, and consciousness, lest they be misconstrued, abused, or perverted. For this reason, perhaps Genet's politics are impossible to be universal and only existed as a case study for Genet himself. That does not mean nothing can be gained from him. Because his politics invites individuals to view themselves as each other and disregard differences, a lack of concern for the community may be aroused if there are not significant differences from one political identity to the next. People may cease to involve themselves in the political process and make themselves a target, welcoming corruption, outside influences, and dominance or oppression. For this reason, Genet's politics are to operate in the micro, not the macro. Some small social situations between quarreling neighbors, for example, may be improved by putting aside personal preferences and viewing each other as members of the same community instead of islands in a divided kingdom, but to see no difference between larger political movements could result in a disaster if Genet's politics were applied. If every country welcomed the Holocaust and saw no difference between themselves and the Nazis, the course of history that unfolded during that event could have been far more devastating. Because of this, Genet's politics are not particularly beneficial for global pragmatic purposes, but are useful for more private and interpersonal situations and relationships. They can be used to conquer personal demons, not to conquer the world. And if personal demons are conquered, perhaps there would no longer be a desire to conquer the world. Genet's politics are more focused on psychology, perhaps the psychology of a criminal that has devised his own moral code to justify his diabolical deeds. Despite Genet's shortcomings and benefits, his legacy is one that perhaps he did not take so seriously. Though he dealt with serious subject matters and was probably a somewhat serious man, he did not write in order to guide. He wrote in order to discover and reveal. As noted earlier, he wrote in jails and prison, and while alone in a confined cell, one is left to battle and love only oneself. He wrote to explore his own mentality and discover his inner self. If people find a connection there between Genet and themselves, then maybe they are more alike and have not been as honest with themselves and their ulterior motives. Genet learned to love his inner demons, perhaps as a survival mechanism to be able to live with himself, alone in his cell with nothing but his own haunting thoughts. But he did not stop there. He took it further and did not just love his inner demons, but made love with them. His mental process was an intriguing one, and perhaps if people were all really Genet in the flesh, they could fully grasp his worldview. However, such is not the case. They only catch a glimpse of Genet that he has allowed them to see, and what a glorious yet gruesome glimpse that was. I didn't screw it up too many times. I tried to read it several times earlier, but I kept running out of space on my phone and had to redo it. There's some other stuff I wanted to mention, some earlier things in here, but I didn't want to interrupt the flow of it. I might rewrite this and add those things to it. Where was it? I want to bring it up and not say what they were. Well, there's one about the trees and branches and flowers all being, or the branches, wood, and flowers all being tree. I didn't know about this man at the time, but Maharishi, the TM guy, I was listening to some speech of his, and he was talking about the flower and the sap, it all being the stem, the leaf, the flower. It's all sap. The more you break it down and go to the layer of essence. There's something before that I wanted to mention too. This might cut off. I'll run out of time before I can find it. I think it was on that same page right before that. I was also studying foreign languages at the time, so some of this categorization and language being used as a lubricant, that may have influenced some of it. That wasn't what I was going to bring up, though. Oh, yeah, when it talks about healing. When there's no wound, there's no healing. And wounds can expose guts and get painful. But yeah, the wound brings rejuvenation. Also, another example I might include later. When you break a bone, for example, and it heals, that area can never be broken again. It grows back stronger. It might break like a millimeter right beside it. So I don't know. Does it make that one spot stronger? It just makes the rest of it weaker. So I don't know. Just little things like that I might include in it if I ever go to rewrite it and publish it elsewhere. This was 2014, published in 2015. It's one of two publications that I have at the moment.